How to improve power training. So today we talk about how to improve power training, why a measurable increase in power training is more difficult than, for example, max strength or endurance, the need to measure power training or the applicable variables for power training, and then, as always, an applied example of how to improve power training over time. So how to improve power training? As I mentioned in the intro, to measure a measurable increase of power training is a bit more complicated than, for example, if we think about endurance or maximum strength training. In maximum strength training, you can simply see if the weights go up over time and you can maintain repetitions, you probably get stronger. The same is true for endurance training. So if you look at, let's make a simple example, but running, if you are able to run X amount of kilometers in that amount of time, if you can run more kilometers in the same time, or the same amount of kilometers in less time, you have probably increased your endurance. So with power, it's a bit more complicated. So as I've outlined in previous videos, the formula for power is power equals force multiplied by velocity. So force we can easily measure with, let's say, the load on the bar, but the velocity we need to measure. And the complicated thing about it is that we need some equipment for it. What we used to do is we either have position transducers, accelerometers, or if we think about drop jumps for plyometrics, we also have contact mats. So if we think about an applied example of power training and how to improve power training over time, let's take one of the most popular examples of a jump squat. So you have a bar on your back, squat down, and you jump up. So in order to improve the jump squat over time, again, there are two variables, force and velocity. So the force in terms of the load on the bar is fixed. Let's say we take 30 kilos as a simple example, 30 kilos, and we jump, and the velocity might be 2 meters per second. So over time, we want to see an increase of 2 meters per second to, let's say, 2.2 to 2.4, 2.6 meters per second, as an example. So then we could see that we improved with our power training. So the load stays the same, but we see increases in velocity. The same is true if we switch it around and we say we keep velocity constant and improve loads. That, from practical experience, is a little bit more difficult to administer and to monitor and then give real-time feedback, but that's also possible. So let's say we want to train at 2 meters per second velocity, and then over time we increase the load on the bar, so the force goes up. Another example for how to improve power training, if we think about a plyometric training and we think about contact times, so a drop jump, you drop down, you have a contact on the mat, and you jump up. So normally these drop jumps, you can either measure the contact time, as I just outlined, and you can measure the flight time. So for the one who already knows, contact time and flight time is the reactive strength index. So there are two variables that influence the reactive strength index. So we drop down from a certain height. Our contact time is, let's say, 200 milliseconds, and our flight time is 400 milliseconds. So if we are able to do now the same thing of dropping down from the same height, 200 milliseconds contact time, and 500 milliseconds flight time, we know we improved in our power training. Vice versa, if we are able to drop from the same height with a shorter contact and the same flight time, we also know that we improved throughout our power training efforts. So to wrap it up, in order to see whether you improved in your power training, you need to measure, and that can be done via linear position transducers, accelerometers, or contact mats, depending on what you want to use for your training. And we need to measure the variables such as contact time and flight time for the plyometrics, and for power training efforts, ballistic efforts, and the dynamic efforts, we can measure the force as in load on the bar, for example, and the velocity in meters per second.